So we are on, the subject is basically um how to look at a retirement portfolio. Okay, how do I look at a retirement portfolio? And that's the main question right now. That's what we're going to be dealing with today, right? How do we deal with a retirement portfolio? Now, traditionally, we would look at a retirement portfolio like this. You'd say, well, if they usually use they use the rule of thumb for years. They used the rule of thumb for years, where the thought was, and I just want to see something here for a minute. Okay, so um okay, so when we're looking at a retirement portfolio and saving money for retirement, what we basically want to see is that we've balanced our stock exposure to our fixed income exposure. So our stock exposure is basically going to be our exposure to equities, right? Exposure to equities. Whereas our fixed income exposure is going to be our exposure to bonds. Now, going back the last 50 years of returns, what we see is that the S&P 500 has returned about 12%. Now, that's no guarantee that it'll continue to do that, but we find in time that it does kind of return that investment growth to an investor, right? And we found that over the last 50 years, bonds, government bonds in particular, have returned about 3 to 4%, just beating inflation, because inflation usually runs about 3%. As a matter of fact, today, inflationary numbers came in and it came in at 2.8%. Today we're in March of 2025 for people who are watching this video later. So what does that mean to the investor? Well, I can show you empirically that if 50 years ago, so 50 years ago would be 1974, and I'm going to make up a scenario. Let's assume that you were a 10-year-old kid and you had a wealthy aunt who thought the world of you, and she left you in her will. And she said, I'm going to leave you $100,000 and you'll get the access to the money 50 years from now when you're 60. So now I know you're set in your older age, but plus I'm encouraging you to be productive during your lifetime. I've actually seen stuff like this, where people have inherited significant amounts of money, but it was under the condition that they had already established themselves, either getting an advanced degree or do whatever. Usually it has tied to education. I've actually seen it. But in this case, and it's probably a smart way to go, because you give the people the money right up front, who knows what happens. You give them the incentive to go ahead and make something out of themselves. You've done them a favor, right? So now, long story short, you've got this 100,000, which, by the way, in 2025 dollars, the 100,000 50 years ago was worth about 600,000 today, based on inflation. Okay. So you put this, so now your aunt says, with a legal guardian, whoever's the lawyer handling this, you can put this money in you can do either two things with this money. You could put it into S&P 500 index, because picking stocks is a fool's game. I think everybody would agree that understands investments professionally would understand that picking stocks is a fool's errand. We know that years ago, the Wall Street Journal compiled they did something called, they had chimpanzees throw darts, the famous study. They took the Wall Street Journal back in the day, before internet, when all the stocks were listed every day. They put them on a board, and they had these chimpanzees throw darts at the board. And after, I don't forget how many they did, 30, 50, usually the proper diversification is about 30. And then they took the stocks wherever the dart landed, they took those stocks and they created a portfolio. Then they compared the return on that portfolio against some of the best investors in the world and their returns, and the monkeys. They went ahead years ago and did it again. And you can look this up. And they did it again, but this time they didn't want to get involved with using chimpanzees. They did it themselves. They blindfolded themselves and did the same thing. Again, they won. Is that conclusive? I mean, it's anecdotal, maybe. It's a little more than anecdotal. It's more like kind of a rough study, if you want to call it that. It's not really like a high level statistically significant thing. But what we all agree on in finance is that stocks follow a random walk, an economy follows a random walk. Many of the things that affect stocks are not immediately understandable. So therefore, things like COVID, who knew that that was going to come? Hurricane Sandy, the devastation there. No one could predict that. 9/11, horrible, horrible thing. Who could predict it? So we know that stocks are affected by a random walk, and therefore picking stocks is just ridiculous on a short term. Yes, there's people, and I know them, very bright people, and I've that will run technical analysis and see trends and feel that there's an advantage there. Usually, if there's an advantage in trading, it's because you've done an arbitrage where you've picked one thing and sold another, and you're looking at the relationship of two stocks and not the overall market. So if you're looking for ways where you can beat the market short term by trading, it usually would center around doing some sort of arbitrage strategy. But just plain out picking stocks, history has shown that it's just you think you're doing something purposeful, but you're not. And a lot of times what we see is people reach for stocks as they need to make up a budget. Maybe they retired too soon. Maybe Social Security and retirement savings just isn't making it for them. Maybe they think that they're more clever than the markets. It just is shown, history has shown that doesn't work. So what we see is that going back to my fictional person, if they took the money and left it in the S&P, closed the computer, like Warren Buffett says, never look at it, they're going to come up with a return of about 12%. If they put it in the government bonds, they're going to beat inflation by about a point. What's the difference on a compounded basis? You can work out the numbers yourself. You can work out the numbers yourself. You can go ahead, open up an Excel spreadsheet or use your financial calculator, put in 100,000, make the years 50, 100,000, make the time 50 years, put 12% in, see the number. Then do the same 100,000, 50, and put 4% in. And what you're going to get is if you left your money in the bond market, you would have made about $700,000. I'm going to do it right now for you on my HB12C. So 100,000, the present value, 50 is the number of periods, and 12 is the interest. Okay. You're going to get about $700,000. You're going to get about $700,000 if you do it that way. Okay. You're going to get $700,000 if you do it that way. Okay. If you do the same thing and put it in the S&P and do it at 12%, you're going to get $24 million. That is a huge difference. That is clearly a huge difference. Okay. Hold on one second. So you're going to see that that's going to be the difference. You're going to see that the difference is going to be $24 million versus 10 million, versus about $700,000. So let me see if I could show you that empirically. So I'm going to open up a spreadsheet. Okay. I might even have it with me. Bear with me. Stay with me a minute. I'm just looking for the spreadsheet that I have. Here we go. All right, I'm gonna go back up. Here's the spreadsheet. And notice, if you look at my spreadsheet, the 100,000 at 4% is 700,000. As I keep changing the mix into bonds, into stocks, it equals 28 million nine, not 24 million, 28 million nine. Most people save right around here. Most people save right around here. Most people don't want, because what happens is people get very nervous. They say to themselves, oh my God, I don't want to be invested, not touch stocks. And maybe when I finally need the money, the stock market goes down, because we know over 50 years, we've had prolonged periods of downward trends. We've definitely had prolonged periods of downward trends. So that's the fear. The people are fearful. Retirees are fearful. So they'll take on some stock exposure, but they're not going to leave it all in stocks. And that's why it comes in around here. And that's if you save this money that much and you were really a saver, you're going to get a number like that. Only the brave souls that just buy it and don't look at it again, they're going to make those kind of returns. If you assume the same returns, which I don't think is a horrible assumption, but I don't have a crystal ball. I'm not going to be honest with that. And then look how the value really grows. And that's the power of compounding. Okay. So years ago, we used to say, if you were 50 years old, do a 50-50 split, bonds and stocks. If you're 25 years old, you can afford to do 75-25. If you're getting older than that, you really got to be mostly in bonds, because you don't want that downturn when you need the money. And I think what we're seeing right now is a lot of people don't have those type of retirement funds. I'm only saying that because I see what I read and what the government's reporting. People are having a tough time and they're reaching for stocks. And that's why I think right now we're finding stocks are overvalued and people are really suffering. Again, today the market's down. If we go back, this is March 12th to 2025. We're starting to see a real downturn in the market, because stocks are just overvalued. We've talked about that. So that's the point I want to make. That's the point. Okay. Any questions out there? Any questions?
Nope, all good.
Okay, so now I'm going to go back to your assignment and what I want you to work on this week. And this is the stuff you want to think about when you think about retirement. First, you want to think about diversification. You want to choose a mix of assets that balance risk and return. We just talked about that. And you want to consider including a combination of stocks, ETFs, fixed income. If generally speaking, and you can't leave your whole retirement or your future, especially when you're not working. People are living longer, so you probably should be working longer, and you should be doing stuff that you enjoy in life. That's not everybody has that luxury, but that's always a good thing. But you want to consider a combination of assets. And then you got to ask yourself, how do you feel about risk? Obviously, younger people could take more risk because they have a lifetime to make up for them. Older people, they're going to be a little more risk averse because they're going to be worried that this just isn't going to work out, right? And then you're going to pick an investment selection of stocks, bonds, mutual funds. ETFs are a much better alternative now than a mutual fund. Mutual funds are almost going like the way of the West. With a mutual fund, you're paying fees in and out. You're getting all kinds of tax issues because you can hold on to a mutual fund, but if other people sell, you can get a tax bill for something you didn't even trigger. In other words, it'll work out in the end, but you can get a tax bill on a year you lost money theoretically because of other investors who sold and you held on to the mutual fund. And it gets divided equally. At least that's the way I understand it. But an ETF, it's just like a stock. You trade it in and out. ETFs are rapidly becoming the only way to invest in the market if you want a diversified portfolio. And you're seeing that in the money flows. Or you could just leave it in cash, the most simple number, like you keep in a savings account. You have to look at past returns and dividends. So a lot of this is predicated on historical returns, right? Like I told you, 12% has been the number. But the S&P 500 doesn't mean it's going to continue. It could get better, it could get worse. We don't know how dividends are going to work. But what we do know is that stock picking just doesn't work. And when people tell me they want to day trade, you know what I tell them? Do yourself a favor. Go to Las Vegas, Go to Atlantic City. At least you get a free prime rib. You get a comp room. You're going to lose your money anyway. You might as well get something for it. And that's the truth. And I've been in the markets my whole life. I know about this. I've seen it. You don't want to be there. People with more capital institutions will shoot against you. You will just be fodder along the way. Fodder. Right? Not father. Fodder. And you want to consider the economic situation that's out there. Now, when you buy the S&P 500, I'm not here to sell you on the S&P 500, but what you are buying is a broad cross-section of American industry, which has always done well. Does that mean it's going to continue? Again, we don't know, but it's always done well, the S&P 500, because it's a blend, a diversified blend of American industry. And American industry is one of the, and maybe arguably the greatest economic driver in economic history. The United States economy right now at this point is the most sophisticated, largest economy that's ever existed, especially when you go per capita. When you look at the economy versus the number of people here versus other economies versus, yeah, like they say, the Chinese are coming up, but the Chinese have like a billion, 4 billion, I mean, I'm sure, I'm just horsing that, but 1.5 billion people. We have only 350 million people, maybe 380. Not everybody's working age. We're producing more GDP than any other country. So on a per capita basis, I think our per capita GDP is $72,000 per person. We're in and that includes that we're just still a diverse economy, and we do have people that aren't sharing or producing in the same fashion. God love them, and they're still working really hard. And we have the most sophisticated military that ever existed. So there's a lot to love, and that's the reason why people want to be here. We have great education system. I mean, I know we've had questions about, is this the right way to educate people and blah, 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 but it's available and it's good. I'm in education now. Believe me, if you want it, it's there. So all these things make the S&P 500 something that's really true. We have tax laws and we have property rights that protect anything you invent. We have a jurisprudence system that protect copyrights and deeds and titles and ownership. We give you encouragement. The tax system works in your favor. So that is one of the reasons to like it. Now, in this particular allocation, I'm looking at somebody who's in their 40s. I'm going to say 50% stocks, 30% bonds, 10% mutual funds. Probably less aggressive. This is probably somebody in their 50s, I would say. But if you're a person in your 20s and 30s, and again, this is not my suggestion because I'm not here as an investment advisor. This is just an example of how you want to talk to your investment advisor. Let me be very clear. Because maybe tomorrow, with the way the markets are going, we could see a severe downturn for a while. I mean, if I had been given this little dissertation or this lecture in 1929, you're in for years of really bad times. And in the 1970s, we had a slowdown, if you remember the oil embargo, and then again in the crash of 87. So we know that's part of the market, because if it wasn't, you wouldn't get those returns. There'd be no 28.9. Remember I showed you 28 million, and that only exists because the markets are so risky at times. That's why it exists. And then you're going to make your final submission on this assignment. But this is basically how you want to look at your retirement numbers. I get the question all the time, Professor, where should I put? What stocks do you like? I don't like any stocks. I'm 66 years old. I've been involved in the market since I got out of college. Since 1981. And I've been following and been involved with the market since then. And I could tell you, maybe I bought 5 stocks individually in my whole career. I've invested in some companies, but maybe 5. So I've done that. But maybe 5 stocks, 6 stocks that I really bought, that I looked at. So, let me take a shot. And if I had to add them up, they kind of balanced out. Maybe I had 3 or 4 losers, and I had one really winner. And tell you a story. The only reason why I had that winner was because I was away on vacation and I didn't look at the stock for a while, and something happened and it took off. I probably would have sold it in between if I had a chance to look at it. And this is a while back, but this is the way you put a retirement portfolio together. This is what, and I'm sure if a guy who's much smarter than me by a lot, Warren Buffett would tell you, listen to this guy. He doesn't even keep a computer on his desk. So that's how so as I leave you in this class, that's how I would do this project. That's how I would solve this. Okay. All right. And you come up with something that works for you. I mean, if you're a person in your 30s, and you feel good about life over the next 30 or 40 working years, whatever you have left, well, then change it however you want to change it. Make it 50, make it 60, make it 70% stocks. But if you're going to go into stocks, a diversified portfolio always works based on historic returns. Again, of course, if you were fortunate enough to buy, Nvidia at 10, and now that stock's coming in, by the way. If you were fortunate enough to buy Walmart when it was in the IPO and you never sold it, yeah, of course you're going to do better. If you were fortunate enough to go to your local gasoline station when you fill up and bought a winning lottery ticket, hey, good for you. Same difference. Same difference. It's luck. That's all it is. Because it means that unless you had a crystal ball, you would have been buying more than that lucky ticket. Now, the lottery is obviously a different example, but stocks. If you had that one winner, God knows how many losers you had before you hit the winner. Don't listen to it. People make behavioral mistakes all the time. They hear somebody else did it. So much of what people decide to do is based on what somebody else did, or what they heard, or what they saw on TV, or what they think someone else has. Fear of missing out, is that what they call it? FOMO, whatever that is. But in the reality is, it's based in nonsense. It's not based in reality. The reality is that you have to look at these things statistically. You have to ask yourself, first of all, what do I need? What's right for me? What's my lifestyle? Because if you're not based on your lifestyle and someone else's lifestyle, or you saw a car on TV and you think you're going to look like the person driving that car, nonsense. But if you know what your lifestyle is and it makes you happy and it works for you, then that's the lifestyle you want to create. That's what you want to do. Go to college or get a skill that makes you happy to do what you do every day. This way work is a pleasure. And then create a lifestyle that's affordable. Affordable for some people could be a lot of money. Affordable might be less for others, but it's got to be something that fulfills you. And worry about your retirement and that sort of thing from that standpoint. I know many, through my lifetime working and being involved in finance, I met a number of extraordinarily wealthy people. Some did it on their own. Many inherited and built off of it, but they're wealthy. And I'm not talking about a couple of $1 million in the bank, real wealth, hundreds of millions of dollars. And I never heard any one of them say retirement. They found things they like to do, and that was one thing. And the second thing was they made sure their children and their offspring were educated. Common denominator. All right. So any questions before we wrap up here? But that's it for this particular thought on retirement.